So New York Magazine was founded in the 60s. Clay Felker, Milton Glaser, an incredible art director. Gloria Steinem was an early employee of New York Magazine. Great magazine. Many of you, I hope, would have heard of Gloria Steinem. It was sold then to Fox in the 70s, and Fox sold it to an investment banker a little later, and Bruce Wasserstrom. New York Magazine had recently, within the last few years, launched some pretty good websites. Vulture is one of them, which is pop culture, but they also had Grub Street for food, The Cut, and some others. Anyway, it was still losing money, so they were on the upturn. They were funded, but they decided to sell to a company called Vox Media. It was, and that's what happened. So, but they're still going strong. So, is a magazine a website, or is it printed, or is the content in other words, is the format what determines what's a magazine and what isn't, or is it, meaning, is it web or printed? That's what I mean by format, or is it the content? I think I would argue it's the content. You tell me what you think, folks. Magazines. So magazines like print are struggling, still hanging in there, though. Lots of special interest magazines. And there's something about a relationship between a magazine and its readers that's kind of special, I think you could say. Okay. Radio. You had to have harnessed electricity. You had to have figured out how to put sound in radio waves and then capture it again. And this all happened the turn of the 20th century. This guy named Marconi gets a lot of credit for it, but there are others out there who think that Nikola Tesla is the one who really did it first. And Tesla is worth his own course, arguably a genius in electronics. He and Edison, Thomas Edison, had a fight way back when, and there's a movie about that now, and I found that interesting. I haven't seen the movie. I'm not sure it got the greatest reviews in the world, but I find the topic very interesting. It looks like it has to do with demonstrating the capability of harnessed electricity to light up part of a city, and it was done in New York City, I think at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. And there was a lot of fighting over what type of electricity, AC or DC, would win, and who would build electric generators all over the country, and And again, I think this has a lot of similarities with the internet. A lot of similarities with the internet. Be that as it may, by the 20s and 30s, people had these big items of furniture in their homes. That's a radio, and they all looked at it while they listened. They listened to information and entertainment. Here's a little sort of tiptoe through the tulips about radio. Marconi giving credit. Okay. All right. So General Electric, buys American Marconi and dubs it Radio Corporation of America, RCA. RCA in 1921 broadcasts a heavyweight fight with Jack Dempsey. And this would have been a local broadcast because what was happening is these companies were going in almost like cable companies, wiring cities, and they were setting up radio stations that could broadcast content in major cities. And this company, Westinghouse, started AT&T, that had invented the American Telephone and Telegraph, had invented the telephone. Alexander Graham Bell, that was his company, just like General Electric was Thomas Edison's company. And they did a lot of technological development over their years of being in existence. as a monopoly on telephone. And they develop radio technology, and they're the ones who have ideas for ads to support the operation. Interesting. So, in 1926, GE, Westinghouse, and RCA buy out AT&T. So there's some consolidation, just like we see today, and they launched the National Broadcasting Network, NBC. There's another fella in 1927 who starts a network. And in 1928, William S. Paley, very, very, very famous entrepreneur and developer of radio and then television, whose father is a cigar manufacturer. I think he has his factory in the Bronx. Paley's in his 20s. He buys Judson's network for $400,000, names it the Columbia Broadcasting System. And it's Paley who has the great idea of going to local stations in other cities and saying, if we'll give you we're going to create some really cool programs, some entertainment. We'll let you have it for free. You can run ads on it, but you've got to reserve a certain amount of the time for us to run our own ads. And thus, the concept of a network and network advertising is born. And before too long, they have 122 stations. There's a Tesla, by the way, just to remind you of the basic engine used in the Tesla car was invented by Nikola Tesla. Now, I'm going to set this up for a minute. We're going to listen to some old radio and then some new radio. The first thing I'm going to play is I've got the whole recording of War of the Worlds off of YouTube, and it's close to an hour long. I would suggest you listen to the whole thing, if only for once in your life. But if you don't want to do that, just bounce around in it a little bit and get a feeling, listen to a few minutes and fast forward and listen to a few more minutes. Orson Welles, this is done by the Mercury Theater. And Orson Welles had already been done shows on Broadway that he directed, and he and his friend John Houseman produced. And he was 23 years old at the time of this broadcast. So a couple of words about it. It was broadcast on Halloween Eve, so the night before Halloween in 1938. So it was the Depression. Radio was now the star, taking money from newspapers and also becoming the medium of choice for politicians and others who wanted to get the word out and influence people, etc. So for advertisers, it was becoming a medium of choice. Although there were no visuals, we still had a lot of advertisers on radio, but definitely for politicians, etc. So in some ways, it wasn't that different from the way things are today in terms of the types of programs. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. I'm going to stop now and pull up War of the Worlds for you guys.